Ahoy! With the Forge patch and the Fortify changes that came with that, the meta when it comes to consumables in wars or in Outpost Rush or in arenas has shifted quite a fair bit. Traditionally, the most commonly used consumables in those situations were Oak Flesh Balm, which gives you Fortify in terms of physical damage, or Gemstone Dust, which does the same thing for elemental damage. But since it's a Fortify, this has kind of lost a little bit of value with the patch. Even though it is labeled in the description as Absorption, it is actually classified as a Fortify. And that means, as you can see on New World database, it's an armor Fortify, so it scales off your armor. Other consumables were not affected by that, which includes elemental absorption potions, which still have absorption, which is the same effect as gems, so that's a bit more direct and generally reduces the damage a little bit more. So the general idea for most people was to go towards fire absorption potions, because that's what will be effective when fire mages are the meta, and that makes sense. Since then we've seen a few other shifts. Some people are considering arcane absorption potions now because of Detonate and so on, but generally speaking a lot of people seem to be focused on these absorption potions. I was working on a video about Fortify, Shuriken Fortification versus Elemental Aversion, and in the context of that I want to give gear recommendations, and I kind of stumbled across some interesting discoveries exactly about this. But I can't fit all of that into one video, so that's what I want to explain to you today, and I want to show you why you may be using the wrong consumables. So what we're first going to look at is this table. This was created by XR and Jascapades. Thanks very much to them for letting me use this table in the first place. And I did a bunch of modifications, you will see that in a second, to test out various things. So the first thing that you can see at the bottom is a plus 30% base damage modifier. This is something that Micro suggested in another video. I will talk about that when it comes to the Shuriken Fort vs Elemental Aversion video. But for now, what you need to know is that these are some numbers that you can expect to get hit by in certain situations. So there's a lot going on here. We just need to quickly dissect the basics. You don't need to understand all of these numbers or all of this in context. That's fine. I will highlight the important parts. So basically what this shows you, if you haven't seen my last video about this, is if you are in light and you're getting hit by someone in light, then this is how much effective health you have. If you are in light and you're wearing 5 times elemental aversion and it's elemental damage, then this is your effective health, and this is your effective health with the new Shuriken Fortification. If you're in medium, then you would see the values here. If you're in heavy, you see the values here. And then here we have the value if the attacker is in medium or the attacker is in heavy. So various modifications going into this. And then the same thing is done here with high and low, meaning if you have a high armor value like here, this is an armor that is Fizz weighted, for example, that would have a high value for Fizz and then would in return have a low value for Elemental. So a bunch of different options that we can look at here. And what's overall important for us is the first row here, so we understand how much effective health we have, how much damage we can survive. Now I'm going to show you another table. This is what it would look like if you had 15% absorption, which you would, for example, get from a fire or arcane absorption potion. So this is our second baseline, so to speak. This is what people are currently using. This extra absorption would only apply against the type of damage that the potion protects against. So this would, for example, only be either against fire or against arcane, and not against everything at once. If we put this side by side with our normal damage taken without any extra effects, then you can see that normally we would have 17,000 effective health in heavy, in balanced gear against a light attacker, whereas now we would have 20,000 effective health. Quite a significant increase. But even if we were in light, we would survive an extra 2,000 incoming damage if it was purely fire. So, not bad overall, not bad. But now we bring a third table into play, and that is an old classic. I'll have to show you all the tables here at once so you can directly compare. So just, again, follow along with whatever is highlighted. So these are the values for when you have Oak Flesh Balm or Gemstone Dust, meaning you have 35% fortification either against physical or against elemental. Let's begin with a very simple case. In heavy, a lot of players are still using Oak Flesh or Gemstone, and that's for a good reason as well. If we look at the values here, we have 17,000 normally, we have 19,925 with Oak Flesh or Gemstone, and we have 20,000 with an absorption potion. So we are getting less than 100 extra effective health, and we're talking about a roughly 3,000 health difference in each case. Now, In this case, there's absolutely no reason to use an absorption potion, because when you think about it, if you, for example, want to counter elemental damage, you want to counter a fire staff, then with Gemstone Dust, you would still have almost the same amount of reduction, only that your reduction also covers a lot of other things at the same time. You can see that the effectiveness, if you compare it to the other values, is slightly lower when we have Shirking Fortification, because that means we have Fortify from other effects as well, but it's still roughly 3000 extra over the base value, so this is still completely fine and acceptable. And I would say overall in Heavy there is not really much of a reason to ever consider any of the absorption potions unless you just have a ridiculous amount of base Fortify that would decrease the value of all these too much. If we look on the other side of things at Light, then things are a little different. If we look at the base damage version, we have, if we just round it up a little bit, around 12,000 effective health. With Oak Flesh we have 13,000, but with the Fire Absorption Potion we would have 14,000. So here it makes a much bigger difference, and in Light you're therefore probably better off using the Flame Absorption Potion if you're specifically heavily getting attacked by this type of damage. It is however worth noting that if you're getting attacked by physical damage, this is still a pretty good reduction. This is still more than 1000 extra effective health, which I don't think is bad, and often as a light player, physical damage can be a bigger threat to you, especially if a melee is diving you. And likewise obviously if a bow is sniping at you. But where things get really interesting is in Medium. Medium is currently generally accepted as being one of those places where you use Absorption, which I would say is not necessarily what you should always do, at least. So our normal base value here, balanced base value, is 14,600. That's alright, that's our starting point. And then with Fortify from Oak Flesh, we would have 16,700. With an Absorption Potion for a specific type of damage, we would have 17,216. Given the gap between these, I would say there are a lot of situations where it's actually more effective to have an all-round type of defense against various types of incoming damage, either elemental or physical, than it is to have that slightly higher specialized survivability. Those 500 extra health can quickly stop to matter if any other type of damage is hitting you. For example, the Fire Staff user is quickly switching to their Ice Gauntlet and doing some damage with that, and that would already be offset at this moment. But what I find even more interesting is the high value here. So this is if you're wearing medium armor that is phys weighted, that has more physical rating than elemental rating, which quite a lot of people do, or at least try to do, because it is fairly effective. And this is obviously something you do in Heavy as well. Here you can see that our base value is 15,800 roughly. With Oak Flesh it is 18,300. And with Absorption, with a little bit of rounding, it is 18,600. So we're talking about a 300 damage difference, which means just any stray attack hitting you with anything else will mean that Oak Flesh or Gemstone is at least equally good or better depending on what situation you're in. I think this is particularly important in the context of Elemental Aversion. If you're running Elemental Aversion, then you may not need to run a Flame Absorption pod, and you can run a physical pod instead. You can run an Oak Flesh instead, and then this Oak Flesh, if you have fist-weighted armor because you have Elemental Aversion, would be more effective. A little bit complicated, we'll get into that more in the next days, but this is something that could definitely be considered. So one-sided armor, in Medium especially, makes either Oak Flesh or Gemstone, depending on which way it's weighed, more effective. And this is important to keep in mind because it cannot be influenced by gems, unlike many other damage reductions. This is your raw armor value, so the more armor you have, the more these consumables are affected. The downside is that on the bottom end, things get slightly worse through that. So if you were to run a physical weighted armor, but you're using Gemstone Dust, then your base value would be 13,500, and in the variation with Oak Flesh and Gemstone, in this case it would be Gemstone, it would be 15,200, whereas the variation with the Fire Absorption Potion would get 15,900 effective health. So small downsides to that as well if you are trying to defend against both at the same time. So in that case, for example, you could consider having Oak Flesh and Fire Absorption if you can both fit those on your bar, depending on what your build overall is looking like, what game mode you're playing. All in all, based on the numbers that we're seeing here and the fact that you're usually getting hit by mixed damage, so for example as a bruiser you may be getting hit by a detonate, by a Gravwell and a fire staff and maybe an ice gauntlet and then maybe some split elemental damage as well, for example from whatever, someone's int gems in their weapons. I think it's very effective to have gemstone or oak flesh in many situations over having a specialized potion, even though many people prefer running those in medium currently. In light, the gap is generally a bit bigger and absorption potions can be more effective in some situations, but I definitely wouldn't undervalue the absorption options completely, especially if you're running something like Shadewalker that is fist weighted, or the other way around once again. What you can see here is, in that case, our base value is 12,500, but in the version with Oak Flesh we are at 13,900, whereas the absorption potion is at 14,700. So the gap is still there, but it's not completely massive either, and in some situations it may still be worth having multiple types of damage reduction for multiple different incoming attacks. For example, in Arena especially, where you may often get hit by multiple players at once with different sources of damage. On top of that, I think it's generally good news that Oak Flesh Balm still has a purpose to counter physical damage. Some people really had their doubts about that, again, beyond heavy armor, but it seems like in all cases Oak Flesh Balm keeps at least some level of effectiveness. This can be skewed a little bit further with fortifies around you and all that. Again, this is not perfect, there are factors that can change this, but generally speaking, I do believe the value is at least decent for most players. So my recommendation is in light, pack a few of your classic Oak Flesh Gemstone so that you can use them in situations where you need them, again, especially in Arena. Whereas as a medium or heavy, I would generally recommend running them over absorption potions in most situations, unless you have a very specific thing that you need to counter. This applies less in PvE, where damage is often more specialized, and especially in mutations you will have a specific effect, and that is what the vast majority of the damage will be. Overall, this video though is just a warm-up for what's to come in the next days. So, Shirking Fortification Elemental version is gonna come very soon. I just had to get this out of the way beforehand because it was too big to fit it into the rest of the topic, and I wanted to explain it first so that the gear recommendations will actually make sense to you when they come out. If you're interested in that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you get notified. And we have a bunch of other videos coming up as well, a Greatsword tanking guide, a Rapier DPS guide, more mutation info. So much stuff lined up at the moment, so much work to do, so you can look forward to that. If you'd like to support my work further, then consider supporting me on Patreon, where you can also get early trading tips. Thanks to all my patrons who already do exactly that. Thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.